Have you ever stopped to think about what a truly stable civilization would even look like? I don't mean one that's stagnant or frozen in time, but one that just lasts. Well, today we're going to dive into a different way of thinking about time, a totally different rhythm of existence, by looking at one of history's most fascinating and, well, long-lived societies.
10,000 years. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's how long Japan's Jōmon period lasted. Now, to put that into perspective, that's more than double the length of all of recorded history combined. From the ancient Sumerians all the way to us today. It's an almost mind-boggling stretch of time for a single culture to just keep going.
So yeah, this incredible longevity presents us with a real puzzle. We're so used to history being the story of empires that rise, they expand, and then inevitably they collapse. But the Jōmon, they just didn't follow that script. They managed to maintain their society for millennia, which forces us to ask a really fundamental question. And this is really the heart of our whole explainer today. Was the Jōmon period just stuck, not progressing? Or did it have a completely different kind of social technology? A unique model for existence that was optimized not for rapid, flashy change, but for a quiet, profound endurance. Why didn't it fall apart? Okay, so to really understand what made the Jōmon so different, we first need to look at the model of civilization that we're all pretty familiar with, the one that fills up all our history books. Let's call it the engine of collision. So, in this common model, progress is pretty much everything, right? Civilizations expand, they compete for resources, they develop new technologies, and all of that creates constant friction. This conflict, this friction, it acts like an accelerator. It forces these rapid updates and transformations, new empires, new tech, new religions, but there's a pretty big cost. This model has instability built right into its operating system. It's designed for these intense, fiery bursts of change, not for long-term durability. The Jōmon civilization, on the other hand, was operating on a completely different principle. It wasn't a society that collided, it was a society that tuned. It tuned itself to its environment and its circumstances. When we look at the Jōmon structure, what's really striking is the absence of all the things that usually drive that collision model. There was no big central government forcing updates from the top down. There wasn't a rigid class system creating all that internal friction. And there's no evidence of the kind of technological arms races that speed everything up. Instead, change just happened locally, gradually, continuously. It was a society maintained through constant, subtle adjustments. Think of it more like tuning an instrument rather than smashing it and rebuilding it. Now, this model of gradual, tuned change, it's not just some historical curiosity. What's fascinating is that it has a really striking parallel in a modern philosophical framework called Reflective Humanism. This framework gives us a new language, a new lens to understand the mechanics of what the Jōmon people were actually practicing for thousands of years. So, at its core, reflective humanism suggests we think about how society changes, not as a series of goals we have to hit, but as a continuous journey. The important thing isn't just the direction we're heading in, the vector, but also the pace of that change, the gradient. The key idea here is that keeping the journey itself steady and stable is more important than how quickly we get to any one particular destination. This slide here really breaks down the two fundamental ways that change can happen. Over on the left, you've got collision generation. Think of this as that rapid, disruptive change, the rise and fall of empires we talked about. It's a steep, rocky path, marked by what the framework calls heat and pain. But on the right, you have inquiry generation. This is the Jōmon model. The path is gentle. It allows for slow, continuous adjustments, creating what's described as a quietly ascending spiral with very little disruption or backlash. And this is where it all just clicks into place. The Jōmon society was, in a way, a living, breathing example of these principles. Their gradual, local style of change, that perfectly matches inquiry-driven generation. By minimizing large-scale conflict, they were actively avoiding those steep, painful collision gradients. Their decentralized structure, that reflects what's called an ethics of non-interference, which is basically a principle of letting communities manage themselves. And their whole focus on endurance, that's what the framework calls phase preservation, prioritizing the continuation of the journey itself. So this is all really interesting history, but what does this ancient society and this modern framework actually mean for us right here, right now? Well, it allows us to ask some pretty deep questions about the nature of our own civilization and the instability we feel almost every day. Seriously, think about that for a second. We often complain about the chaos and disruption in our world as if it's some kind of failure. But what if it isn't a failure at all? What if it's the perfectly predictable, logical outcome of a system that we've designed around steep, collisional change? What if all this instability is actually a feature, not a bug? And that leads to a really powerful realization. The Jōmon period teaches us that the opposite of instability isn't a world without change. It's a world with a different kind of change. And this suggests that we have some say in the matter, that maybe stability is a design choice, a matter of consciously choosing to flatten the gradient of our own society's development. This all brings us to our final thought for today. The example of the Jōmon really forces us to step back and reconsider what we value in a civilization, what we even measure as success. So the crucial question becomes this. If we were to shift our measure of success from speed to sustainability, from transformation to endurance, what would that mean for us? Which engines of collision should we maybe power down? And which quiet, continuous inquiries should we protect for the future?